The Black Hole Passes by John Varley. Originally published in the June 1975 issue of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. Republished in two anthologies, SF Choice 77 and The Mammoth Book of Mindblowing SF in 2009, then in multiple collections of the author's stories. In 1978 alone there were three, a Dutch one, The Persistence of Vision, and In the Hall of the Martian Kings. A German one in 1981, and Goodbye Robinson Crusoe and Other Stories in 2013. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel Quasar Spectra. The Black Hole Passes. Jordan looked up from the log of the day's transmissions and noted with annoyance that Tremonisha was lying with her legs half buried in the computer console. He couldn't decide why that bothered him so much, but it did. He walked over to her and kicked her in the face to get her attention, his foot sailing right through her as if she wasn't there, which she wasn't. He waited, tapping his foot for her to notice it. 20 seconds later she jumped, then looked sheepish. "You blinked," Jordan crowed. "You blinked. You owe me another $5. Again he waited, not even conscious of waiting. After a year at the station, he had reached the point where his mind simply edited out the 20-second time lag. Given the frantic pace of life at the station, there was little chance he would miss anything. "All right, so I blinked. I'm getting tired of that game. Besides, all you're doing is wiping out your old debts. You owe me $455 now instead of $460. You liked it well enough when you were winning," he pointed out. "How else could you have gotten into me for that kind of money, with my reflexes?" Wait. "I think the totals show who has the faster reflexes, but I told you a week ago that I don't appreciate being bothered when I'm reading." She waved her fac-printed book, her thumb holding her place. "Oh, listen to you, pointing out to me what you don't like, while you're all spread out from my computer. You know that drives me up the wall." Wait. She looked down at where her body vanished into the side of the computer, but instead of apologizing, she flared up. "Well, so what? I never heard of such foolishness, walking around chalk marks on the floor all the time so I won't melt into your precious furniture. Who ever heard of such—" She realized she was repeating herself. She wasn't good at heated invective, but had been getting practice at improving it in the past weeks. She got up out of the computer and stood glowering at Jordan, or glowering at where he had been. Jordan had quickly scanned around his floor and picked out an area marked off with black tape. He walked over to it and stepped over the lines and waited with his arms crossed, a pugnacious scowl on his face. "Well, how do you like that?" He spat out at her. "I've been very scrupulous about avoiding objects in your place." "Chalk marks, indeed. If you used tape like I told you, you wouldn't be rubbing them off all the time with that fat ass of yours." But she had started laughing after her eyes followed to where he was now standing, and it soon got out of control. She doubled over, threatened to fall down, she laughed so hard. He looked down and tried to remember what it was that the tape marked off at her place. Was that where she kept the toilet? He jumped hastily out of the invisible toilet and was winding up a scathing remark, but she had stopped laughing. The remarks about the fat ass had reached her, and her reply had crawled back at the speed of light. As he listened to her, he realized anything he could say would be superfluous. She was already as angry as she could be. So he walked over to the holo set and pressed a switch. The projection he had been talking to zipped back into the tank to become a 10-centimeter angry figure, waving her arms at him. He saw the tiny figure stride to her own set and slap another button. The tank went black. He noticed with satisfaction just before she disappeared that she had lost her place in the book. Then, in one of the violent swings of mood that had been scaring him to death recently, he was desolately sorry for what he had done. His hands trembled as he pressed the call button, and he felt the sweat popping out on his forehead. But she wasn't receiving. Great. One neighbor in 500 million kilometers, and I pick a fight with her. He got up and started his ritual hunt for a way of killing himself that wouldn't be so grossly bloody that it would make him sick. Once again, he came to the conclusion that there wasn't anything like that in the station. Why couldn't they think of things like that? He fumed. No drugs, no poison gas, no nothing. Damn air system has so goddamn many safeties on the damn thing, I couldn't raise the CO2 count in here if my life depended on it. Which it does. If I don't find a painless way to kill myself, it's going to drive me to suicide. He broke off, not only because he had played back that last rhetorical ramble, but because he was never comfortable hearing himself talk to himself. It sounded too much like a person on the brink of insanity. Which I am! It felt a bit better to have admitted it out loud. It sounded like a very sane thing to say. He grasped the feeling, built steadily on it until it began to feel natural. After a few minutes of deep breathing, he felt something approximating calm. Calmly, he pressed the call button again to find that Tremonisha was still not at home. Calmly, he built up spit and fired it at the innocent hollow tank, where it dripped down obscenely. He grinned. Later, he could apologize, but right now it seemed to be the right course to stay angry. He walked back to the desk and sat down before the computer digest of the 3 trillion bits that had come over the hotline in the last 24 hours. Here was where he earned his salary. There was an added incentive in the realization that Tremonisha had not yet started her scan of her own computer's opinions for the day. Maybe he could scoop her again. Jordan Moon was the station agent for Starline Incorporated, one of the 2 major firms in the field of interstellar communication, if you can call listening in on a party line communication. He lived and worked in a station that had been placed in a slow circular orbit 13 billion kilometers from the sun. It was a lonely area. It had the sole virtue of being right in the center of the circle of greatest signal strength of the Ophiuchi hotline. About all that anyone had ever known for sure about the Ophiuchites was the fact that they had one hell of a big laser somewhere in their planetary system. 70 Ophiuchi. Aside from that, which they couldn't very well conceal, they were an extremely close-mouthed race. They never volunteered anything about themselves directly, and human civilization was too parsimonious to ask. Why build a giant laser? The companies asked when it was suggested, when all that lovely information floods through space for free. Jordan Moon had always thought that an extremely good question, but he turned it around. Why did the Ophiuchites bother to build a giant laser? What did they get out of it? No one had the slightest idea, not even Jordan, who fancied himself an authority on everything. He was not far wrong, and that was his value to the company. No one had yet succeeded in making a copyright stand up in court when applied to information received over the hotline. The prevailing opinion was that it was a natural resource, like vacuum, and free to all who could afford the expense of maintaining a station in the commentary zone. The expense was tremendous, but the potential rewards were astronomical. There were 15 companies elbowing each other for a piece of the action, from the giants like Starline and Hotline Limited, down to several freelancers who had paid hole hunters to listen in when they were in the vicinity. But the volume of transmissions was enough to make a board chairman weep and develop ulcers. And the aliens, with what the company thought was boorish inconsideration, insisted on larding the valuable stuff with quintillions of bits of gibberish that might be poetry or might be pornography or recipes or pictures or who knew what, that the computers had never been able to unscramble and had given a few that chewed it over too long the galloping jitters. The essential problem was that 99% of what the aliens thought worth sending over the line was trash to humans. But that 1%, the symbiotic spacesuits, that had made it possible for human civilization to inhabit the rings of Saturn with no visible means of support, feeding, respirating, and watering each other in a closed ecology daisy chain. The partial gravitational rigor, which made it possible to detect and hunt and capture quantum black holes and make them sit up and do tricks for you, like powering a space drive. Macromolecule manipulation, without which people would die after only 2 centuries of life. Null field, and all the things it had made possible. Those were the large visible things that had changed human life in drastic amounts, but had not made anyone huge fortunes, simply because they were so big that they quickly diffused through the culture because of their universal application. The real money was in smaller, patentable items like circuitry, mechanical devices, chemistry, and games. It was Jordan's job to sift those few bits of gold from the oceans of gossip, or whatever it was that poured down the line every day. And to do it before Tremonisha and his other competitors. If possible, to find things that Tremonisha missed entirely. He was aided by a computer that tirelessly sorted and compared to dump the more obvious chaff before printing out a large sheet of things it thought might be of interest. Jordan scanned that sheet each day, marking out items and thinking about them. He had a lot to think about, and a lot to think with. He was an encyclopedic synthesist, a man with volumes of major and minor bits and pieces of human knowledge, and the knack of putting it together and seeing how it might fit with the new stuff from the line. When he saw something good, he warmed up his big laser and fired it off special delivery direct to Pluto. Everything else, including the things the computer had rejected as nonsense, because you never could tell what the monster brains on Luna might pick out of it on the second or third go-round. He recorded on a chip the size of a fly speck and loaded it into a tiny transmitter and fired it off parcel post in a 5-stage high-G message rocket. His aim didn't have to be nearly as good as the Ophiokites. A few months later, the payload would streak by Pluto and squeal out its contents in the 2 minutes it was in radio range of the big dish. "I wish their aim had been a little better," he groused to himself as he went over the printout for the 4th time. He knew it was nonsense, but he felt like grousing. The diameter of the laser beam by the time it reached Sol was 500 million kilometers. The center of the beam was twice the distance from Pluto to the Sun, a distance amounting to about 20 seconds of arc from 70 Ophioki. But why aim it at the Sun? No one listening there. Where would the logical place be to aim a message laser? Jordan was of the opinion that the aim of the Ophiokites was better than the company president gave them credit for. Out here, there was very little in the way of noise to garble the transmissions. If they had directed the beam through the part of the solar system where planets are most likely to be found, where they all are found, the density of expelled solar gases would have played hob with reception. Besides, Jordan felt that none of the information would have been much good to planet-bound beings anyway. Once humanity had developed the means of reaching the cometary zone and found that messages were being sent out there rather than to the Earth, where everyone had always expected to find them, they were in a position to utilize the information. They knew what they were doing, all right, he muttered, but the thought died away as something halfway down the second page caught his eye. Jordan never knew for sure just what he was seeing in the digests, perhaps a better way to make cyanide stew or advice to lovelorn Ophiokites, but he could spot when something might have relevance to his own species. He was good at his work. He looked at the symbols printed there and decided they might be of some use to a branch of genetic engineering. 10 minutes later, the computer had lined up the laser, and he punched the information into it. The lights dimmed as the batteries were called upon to pour a large percentage of their energy into 3 spaced pulses, 5 seconds apart. Jordan yawned and scratched himself. Another day's work done. Elapsed time, 3 hours. He was doing well. That only left 21 hours before he had anything else he needed to do. Leisure. He approached the hollow tank again and with considerable trepidation pressed the call button. He was afraid to think of what he might do if Tremonisha did not answer this time. "You had no call to say what you'd said," she accused as she appeared in the tank. "You're absolutely right," he said quickly. "It was uncalled for and untrue. Tree, I'm going crazy. I'm not myself. It was a childish insult, and you know it was without basis in fact." She decided that was enough in the way of apology. She touched the projection button and joined him in the room. So beautiful, so alive, and so imaginary he wanted to cry again. Jordan and Tremonisha were the system's most frustrated lovers. They had never met in the flesh, but had spent a year together by hollow projection. Jordan knew every inch of Tremonisha's body, every pore, every hair. When they got unbearably horny, they would lie side by side on the floor and look at each other. They would strip for each other, taking hours with each garment. They developed the visual and oral sex fantasy to a pitch so fine that it was their own private language. They would sit inches apart and pass their hands close to each other, infinitely careful never to touch and spoil the illusion. They would talk to each other, telling what they would do when they finally got together in person. Then they would sit back and masturbate themselves into insensibility. "You know," Tremonisha said, "you were a lousy choice for this job. You look like shit, you know that? I worry about you. This isolation is, well, it's not good for you." "Driving me crazy, right?" He watched her walk to one of the taped-off areas on his floor and sit. As she touched the chair in her room, the hollow projector picked it up, and it winked into existence in his world. She was wearing a red paper blouse, but had left off the pants, as a reproach, he thought, and a reminder of how baseless his jibe had been. She raised her left index finger 3 times. That was the signal for a scenario. Captain Future meets the Black Widow, one of his favorites. They had evolved the hand signals when they grew impatient with asking each other, "Do you want to play Antony and Cleopatra?" One of her favorites. He waved his hand, negating his opening lines. He was impatient with the games and fantasies. He was getting impatient with everything. Besides, she wasn't wearing her costume for the Black Widow. "I think you're wrong," he said. "I think I was the perfect choice for this job. You know what I did after you shut off? I went looking for a way to kill myself." For once, he noticed the pause. She sat there in her chair, mouth slightly open, eyes unfocused, looking like she was about to drool all over her chin. Once they had both been fascinated with the process by which their minds suspended operations during the time lag that was such a part of their lives. He had teased her about how stupid she looked when she waited for his words to catch up to her. Then, once he had caught himself during one of the lags and realized he was a slack-jawed imbecile too. After that, they didn't talk about it. She jerked and came to life again, like a humanoid robot that had just been activated. "Jordan, why did you do that?" She was half out of the chair in a reflex comforting gesture, then suppressed it before she committed the awful error of trying to touch him. "The point is, I didn't. Try it sometime. I found 9 dozen ways of killing myself. It isn't hard to do, I'm sure you can see that. But, you see, they have gauged me to a nicety. They know exactly what I'm capable of and what I can never do. If I could kill myself painlessly, I would have done it 3 months ago, when I first started looking. But the most painless way I've doped out yet still involves explosive decompression. I don't have the guts for it." "But surely you've thought of—" Never mind." "You mean you've thought of a way?" He didn't know what to think. He had been aware for a long time that she was a better synthesist than he. The production figures and several heated communications from the home office proved that. She could put nothing and nothing together and arrive at answers that astounded him. What's more, her solutions worked. She seldom sent anything over her laser that didn't bear fruit and often saw things he had overlooked. "Maybe I have," she evaded. "But if I did, you don't think I'd tell you after what you just said. Jordan, I don't want you to kill yourself. That's not fair. Not until we can get together and you try to live up to all your boasting. After that, well, maybe you'll have to kill yourself." He smiled at that and was grateful she was taking the light approach. He did get carried away, describing the delights she was going to experience as soon as they met in the flesh. "Give me a hint," he coaxed. "It must involve the life system, right? It stands to reason after you rule out the medical machines, which no one could fool into giving out a dose of cyanide. Let's see, maybe I should take a closer look at that air intake. It stands to reason that I could get the CO2 count in here way up if I could only—" "No!" she exploded, then listened to the rest of his statement. "No hints. I don't know a way. The engineers who built these things were too smart, and they knew some of us would get depressed and try to kill ourselves. There's no wrenches you could throw into the works that they haven't already thought of and countered. You just have to wait it out." 6 more months, he groaned. "What does that come to in seconds?" 20 less than when you asked the question, and didn't that go fast?" Looked at that way, he had to admit it did. He experienced no subjective time between the question and the answer. If only he could edit out days and weeks as easily as seconds. "Listen, honey, I want to do anything I can to help you. Really, would it help if I tried harder to stay out of your furniture?" He sighed, not really interested in that anymore, but it would be something to do. "All right." So they got together, and she carefully laid out strips of tape on her floor, marking the locations of objects in his room. He coached her, since she could see nothing of his room except him. When it was done, she pointed out that she could not get into her bedroom without walking through his auxiliary coelostat. He said that was all right as long as she avoided everything else. When they were through, he was as depressed as ever. Watching her crawl around on her hands and knees made him ache for her. She was so lovely, and he was so lonely. The way her hair fell in long, ashen streams over the gathered materials of her sleeves, the curl of her toes as she knelt to peel off a strip of tape, the elastic give and take of the tendons in her legs, all the myriad tiny details he knew so well and didn't know at all. The urge to reach out and touch her was overpowering. "What would you like to do today?" she said when they were through with the taping. "I don't know. Everything I can't do. Would you like me to tell you a story? No. Would you tell me a story? She crossed her legs nervously. She didn't know how to cope with him when he got in these unresponsive moods. Tremonisha was not subject to the terrors of loneliness that were tearing Jordan apart. She got along quite well by herself, aside from the sometimes maddening sexual pressures. But masturbation satisfied her more than it did Jordan. She expected no problems waiting out the 6 months until they were rotated back to Pluto. There was even a pleasurable aspect of the situation for her, the breathless feeling of anticipation waiting for the moment when they would finally be in each other's arms. Jordan was no good at all at postponing his wants. Those wants, surprisingly to him, were not primarily sexual. He longed to be surrounded by people, to be elbow to elbow in a crowd, to smell the human smell of them around him, to be jostled, even shoved, even to be punched in the face if necessary, but to be touched by another human being. It didn't have to be Tremonisha, though she was his first choice. He loved her, even when he yelled at her for being so maddeningly insubstantial. All right, I'll tell you a story. He fell silent, trying to think of one that had some aspect of originality. He couldn't, and so he fell back on the further exploits of the explorers of the Pink Planet. For that one, Tremonisha had to take off all her clothes and lie on her back on the floor. He sat very close to her and put the trio of adventurers through their paces. Captain Rock Rogers, commander of the expedition, he who had fearlessly led the team over yawning wrinkles and around pores sunk deep into the treacherous surface of the Pink Planet. The conqueror of Left Breast Mountain, the man who had first planted the flag of the United Planets on the dark top of that dangerously unstable prominence and was planning an assault on the fabled Right Breast Mountain, home of the savage tribe of killer microbes. Why? Because it's there, Tremonisha supplied. Who's telling this story? Dr. Mary Jane Peters, who single-handedly invented the epidermal polarizer that caused the giant radioactive mutated crab lice to sink into the epithelium on the trio's perilous excursion into the pubic jungle. I still think you made that up about the crab lice. I reports what I sees. Shut up, child. And Trog, half man, half slime mold, who had used his barbarian skills to domesticate Jojo, the man-eating flea, but who was secretly a spy for the Arcturian horde, and was working to sabotage the expedition and the hopes of all humanity. As we rejoin the adventurers, Mary Jane tells Rock that she must again venture south from their base at the first sparse seedlings of the twisted pubic jungle, or their fate is sealed. Why is that, my dear? Rock says boyishly. Because, darling, down at the bottom of the great Rift Valley lie the only deposits of rare muscatite on the whole planet, and I must have some of it to repair the burnt-out denoxifier on the overdrive, or the ship will never... Meanwhile, back at reality, Tremonisha caused her left northern promontory to move southwards and rub itself lightly through the great Rift Valley, causing quite an uproar among the flora and fauna there. "Earthquake!" Trog squeaks and runs howling back towards safety in the great crater in the middle of the plain of Belly. "Strictly speaking, no," Mary Jane points out, grabbing at a swaying tree to steady herself. "It might more properly be called a Tremonisha quake." "Tremonisha, must you do that while I'm just getting into the story? It plays hell with the plot line." She moved her hand back to her side and tried to smile. She was willing to patronize him, try to get him back to himself, but this was asking a lot. What were these stories for? She reasoned, but to get her horny and give her a chance to get some relief. "All right, Jordan, I'll wait." He stared silently down at her, and a tear trembled on the tip of his nose, hung there, and fell down toward her abdomen, and of course it didn't get her wet. It was followed by another, and still she wasn't wet, and he felt his shoulders begin to shake. He fell forward onto the soft, inviting surface of her body and bumped his head hard on the deck. He screwed his eyes shut tight so he couldn't see her and cried silently. After a few helpless minutes, Treemonisha got up and left him to recover in privacy. Treemonisha called several times over the next 5 days. Each time Jordan told her he wanted to be alone. That wasn't strictly true. He wanted company more than he could say, but he had to try isolation and see what it did to him. He thought of it as destructive testing, a good principle for engineering, but questionable for mental equilibrium. But he had exhausted everything else. He even called up the humanoid, his only other neighbor within radio range. He and Treemonisha had named him that because he looked and acted so much like a poorly constructed robot. The humanoid was the representative of Lasercom. No one knew his name, if he had one. When Jordan had asked passing hole hunters about him, they said he had been out in that neighborhood for over 20 years, always refusing rotation. It wasn't that the humanoid was unfriendly, he just wasn't much of anything at all. When Jordan called him, he answered the call promptly, saying nothing. He never initiated anything. He would answer your questions with a yes or a no or an I don't know. If the answer required a sentence, he said nothing at all. Jordan stared at him and threw away his plan of isolating himself for the remainder of his stay at the station. "That's me in 6 months," he said, cutting the connection without saying goodbye and calling Treemonisha. "Will you have me back?" he asked. "I wish I could reach out and grab you by the ears and shake some sense back into you. Look," she pointed to where she was standing, "I've avoided your tape lines for 5 days, though it means threading a maze when I want to get to something. I was afraid you'd call me and I'd pop out in the middle of your computer again and freak you." He looked ashamed. He was ashamed. Why did it matter? "Maybe it isn't so important after all." She lay down on the floor. "I've been dying to hear how the story came out," she said. "You want to finish it now?" So he dug out Rock Rogers and Mary Jane and sent them into the bushes, and, to enliven things, threw in Jojo and his wild mate Gigi. For 2 weeks, Jordan fought down his dementia. He applied himself to the computer summaries, forcing himself to work at them twice as long as was his custom. All it did was reconfirm to him that if he didn't see something in 3 hours, he wasn't going to see it at all. Interestingly enough, the computer sheets were getting gradually shorter. His output dwindled as he had less and less to study. The Home Office didn't like it and suggested he do some work on the antennas to see if there was something cutting down on the quality of the reception. He tried it but was unsurprised when it changed nothing. Treemonisha had noticed it too and had run an analysis on her computer. "Something is interfering with the signal," she told him after studying the results. "It's gotten bad enough that the built-in redundancy isn't sufficient. Too many things are coming over in fragmentary form, and the computer can't handle them." She was referring to the fact that everything that came over the hotline was repeated from 10 to 30 times. Little of it came through in its totality, but by adding the repeats and filling in the blanks, the computer was able to construct a complete message 90% of the time. That average had dropped over the last month to 50%, and the curve was still going down. "Dust cloud?" Jordan speculated. "I don't think it could move in that fast. The curve would be much shallower, on the order of hundreds of years before we would really notice a drop-off." Something else, then. He thought about it. If it's not something big, like a dust cloud blocking the signal, then it's either a drop-off in power at the transmitter, or it could be something distorting the signal. Any ideas? Yes, but it's very unlikely, so I'll think about it some more. She exasperated him sometimes with her unwillingness to share things like that with him. But it was her right, and he didn't probe. 3 days later, Treemonisha suddenly lost a dimension. She was sitting there in the middle of his room when her image flattened out like a sheet of paper, perpendicular to the floor. He saw her edge on and had to get up and walk around the flat image to really see it. "I'll call it nude sitting in a chair," he said. "Tree, you're a cardboard cutout." She looked up at him warily, hoping this wasn't the opening stanza in another bout with loneliness. "You want to explain that?" "Gladly. My receiver must be on the fritz. Your image is only two-dimensional now. Would you like to stand up?" She grinned and stood. She turned slowly, and the plane remained oriented the same way, but different parts of her were now flattened. He decided he didn't like it and got out his tools. 2 hours of checking circuitry told him nothing at all. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with the receiver, and when she checked her transmitter, the result was the same. Midway through the testing, she reported that his image had flattened out, too. "It looks like there really is something out there distorting signals," she said. "I think I'll sign off now. I want to check something." And with that, she cut transmission. He didn't care for the abruptness of that and was determined that she wouldn't beat him to the punch in finding out what it was. She could only be searching for the source of the distortion, which meant she had a good idea of what to look for. If she can figure it out, so can I. He sat down and thought furiously. A few minutes later, he got up and called her again. "A black hole," she said when she arrived. "I found it, or at least a close approximation of where it must be." "I was going to say that," he muttered, but he hadn't found it. He had only figured out what it must be. She had known that 3 days ago. "It's pretty massive," she went on. "The gravity waves were what fouled up our reception, and now it's close enough to ruin our transmissions to each other. I thought at first I might be rich, but it looks far too big to handle." That was why she hadn't said anything earlier. If she could locate it and get a track on it, she could charter a ship and come back to get it later. Black holes were fantastically valuable if they were small enough to manipulate. They could also be fantastically dangerous. "Just how big?" he asked. "I don't know yet, except that it's too big to chase. Her image, already surreal enough from the flattening, fluttered wildly and dissolved. He was cut off. He chewed his nails for the next hour, and when the call bell clanged, he almost injured himself getting to the set. She appeared in the room. She was three-dimensional again, wearing a spacesuit, and she didn't look too happy. "What the hell happened? You didn't do that on purpose, did you? Because shut up." She looked tired, like she had been working. "The stresses. I found myself falling toward the wall, and the whole station shipped around it like zip, and all of a sudden everything was creaking and groaning like a haunted house. Bells clanging, lights, scared the shit out of me." He saw that she was shaking, and it was his turn to suffer the pain of not being able to get up and comfort her. She got control again and went on. "It was tidal strains, Jordan, like you read about, that can wreck a hole hunter if she's not careful. You don't dare get too close. It could have been a lot worse, but as it is, there was a slow blowout, and I only just got it under control. I'm going to stay in this suit for a while longer, because everything was bent out of shape. Not enough to see, but enough. Seams parted, some glass shattered, everything rigid was strained some. My laser is broken, and I guess every bit of precision equipment must be out of alignment, and my orbit was altered. I'm moving toward you slightly, but most of my motion is away from the sun. How fast? Not enough to be in danger. I'll be in this general area when they get a ship out here to look for me. Oh, yes, you should get off a message as quick as you can, telling Pluto what happened. I can't talk to them, obviously. He did that, more to calm himself than because he thought it was that urgent. But he was wrong. I think it'll pass close to you, Jordan. You'd better get ready for it. Jordan stood in front of the only port in the station, looking out at the slowly wheeling stars. He was wearing his suit, the first time he had had it on since he arrived. There had just been no need for it. The Star Line listening post was in the shape of a giant dumbbell. One end of it was the fusion power plant, and the other was Jordan's quarters. 1,000 meters away, motionless relative to the station, was the huge parabolic dish that did the actual listening. Why didn't they give these stations some means of movement? He was talking into his suit radio. Treemanisha's holo set had finally broken down, and she could not patch it up. There were too many distorted circuits deep in its guts. Too many resistances had been altered. Too many microchips warped. He realized glumly that even if the passage of the hole left him unscathed, he would not see her again until they were rescued. Too expensive, she said patiently. She knew he was talking just to keep calm and didn't begrudge providing a reassuring drone for him to listen to. There's no need under normal circumstances to move the things once they're in place. So why waste mass on thrusters? Normal circumstances, he scoffed. Well, they didn't think of everything, did they? Maybe there was a way I could have killed myself. You want to tell me what it was before I die? Jordan, she said gently, think about it. Isn't it rather unlikely for a black hole to pass close enough to our positions to be a danger? People hunt them for years without finding them. Who expects them to come hunting you? You didn't answer my question. After the passage, I promise, and don't worry. You know how unlikely it was for it to pass as close as it did to me. Have some faith in statistics. It's surely going to miss you by a wide margin. But he didn't hear the last. The floor started vibrating slowly, in long, accelerating waves. He heard a sound, even through the suit, that reminded him of a rock crusher eating its way through a solid wall. Ghostly fingers plucked at him, trying to pull him backwards to the place where the hole must be, and the stars outside the port jerked in dance rhythms, slowing, stopping, turning the other way, sashaying up and down, then starting to whirl. He was looking for something to grab onto when the port in front of him shattered into dust, and he was expelled with a monstrous whoosh as everything in the station that wasn't bolted down tried to fit itself through that meter-wide hole. He jerked his hands up to protect his faceplate and hit the back of his head hard on the edge of the port as he went through. The stars were spinning at a rate fast enough to make him dizzy. Or were the stars spinning because he was dizzy? He cautiously opened his eyes again, and they were still spinning. His head was throbbing, but he couldn't sync the throb rate with the pain. Therefore, he declaimed to himself, the stars are spinning. On to the next question. Where am I? He had no answers and wished he could slip back into that comforting blackness. Blackness. Black. He remembered and wished he hadn't. Treemanisha, he moaned. "Can you hear me?" Evidently, she couldn't. First order of business, stop the spin before my head unscrews. He carefully handled the unfamiliar controls of his suit jets, squirting streams of gas out experimentally until the stars slowed, and came to rest, except for a residual drift that was barely noticeable. "Very lonely out here," he observed. There was what must be the sun. It was bright enough to be, but he realized it was in the wrong place. It should be. Now, let's see. Where? He located it, and it wasn't nearly as bright as the thing he had seen before. "That's the hole," he said, with a touch of awe in his voice. Only one thing could have caused it to flare up like that. The black hole that had wrecked his home was quite a large one, about as massive as a large asteroid, but with all that it was much smaller than his station had been. Only a tiny fraction of a centimeter across, in fact. But at the surface, the gravity was too strong to bear thinking about. The light he saw was caused by stray pieces of his station that had actually been swept up by the hole and were undergoing collapse into neutronium, and eventually would go even further. He wondered how much radiation he had been exposed to. Soon he realized it probably wouldn't matter. There were a few large chunks of the station tumbling close to him, dimly visible in the starlight. He made out one of the 3-meter rockets he used to send the day's output back to Pluto. For a wild second, he thought he saw a way out of his predicament. Maybe he could work out a way of using it to propel him over to Treemonisha. Then he remembered he had worked all that out on the computer during one of his lonelier moments. Those rockets were designed for accelerating a pea-sized transmitter up to a tremendous velocity, and there was no provision for slowing it down again, or varying the thrust, or turning it on and off. It was useless to him. Even if he could rig it some way such that it would move him instead of drilling straight through his back, the delta V he could get from it was enough to let him reach Treemonisha in about 3 weeks, and that was far, far too long. He started over to it anyway. He was tired of hanging out there in space 1 billion kilometers from anything. He wanted to get close to it, to have something to look at. He clanged onto it and slowly stopped its rotation. Then he clung to it tightly, like an injured monkey to a tree limb. A day later, he was still clinging, but he had thought of a better metaphor. Like a castaway clinging to a log. He laughed to himself. No, he wasn't sure he liked that better. If he cast loose from the rocket, nothing at all would happen to him. He wouldn't drown in salty seas or even choke on hard vacuum. He was like the monkey, very scared and not about to let go of the security that his limb afforded him. "Calling? Treemonisha calling, Jordan. Please answer quickly if you can hear me, because I have the radio set to—" He was too astounded to respond at once, and the voice faded out. Then he yelled until he was hoarse, but there was no answer. He abandoned himself to despair for a time. Then he pulled himself together and puzzled out, with what wits he had left, what it was she might be doing. She was scanning the path of strewn debris with a tight radio beam, hoping he was one of the chunks of metal her radar told her was there. He must be alert and yell out the next time he heard her. Hours later, he was trying to convince himself it hadn't been a hallucination. "Hear me? Because, Treemonisha, I have the radio set to scan the wreckage of your station, and if you take your time, I won't hear you. Treemonisha, call—" It faded again, and he jittered in silence. "Jordan, can you hear me now?" The voice wavered and faded, but it was there. She must be aiming by hand. "I hear you. I figured it out." "Figured what out?" Your painless way of committing suicide. But you were wrong. It's true that if I had stepped outside the station wearing my suit, I would have died of CO2 poisoning eventually, but you were wrong if you thought I could take this isolation. I would have jetted back to the station in just a few hours. His voice broke as he forced himself to look again at the bottomless depths that surrounded him. "You always take the hard way, don't you?" she said, in a voice so gentle and sympathetic that she might have been talking to a child. "Why would you have to step out?" He gurgled. One step ahead again. Why step outside, indeed? Because that's what you do in a spacesuit. You don't wear it inside the station, sealed off from the fail-safe systems inside, unless you want to die when the oxygen in your tanks runs out. I'm not that dense, and you know it. You want to tell me why I didn't see that? No, wait. Don't. Don't outfigure me in that, too. I'll tell you why. Because I didn't really want to kill myself, right? If I had been sincere, I would have thought of it. That's what I finally hoped was the case, but I still didn't want to take the chance of telling you. You might have felt pressure to go through with it if you knew there was a way. Something was nagging at him. He furrowed his brow to squeeze it out in the open, and he had it. "The time lag's shorter," he stated. "How far apart are we?" "A little over 2 million kilometers, and still closing. The latest thing I can get out of my computer, which is working in fits and starts, is that you'll pass within about 1.5 million from me, and you'll be going 5,000 per relative." She cleared her throat. Speaking of that, how much reserve do you have left?" "Why bother yourself? I'll just fade away at the right time and you won't have to worry because you know how long I have to live." "I'd still like to know. I'd rather know." "All right. The little indicator right here says my recyclers should keep right on clugging along for another 5 days. After that, no guarantees. Do you feel better now?" "Yes, I do." She paused again. "Jordan, how badly do you need to talk to me right now? I can stay here as long as you need it, but there's a lot of work I have to do to keep this place running, and I can't afford the power drain to talk to you continuously for 5 days. The batteries are acting badly, and they really do need constant attention." He tried not to feel hurt. Of course, she was fighting her own fight to stay alive. She still had a chance. She wouldn't be Treemanisha if she folded up because the going got rough. The rescue ship would find her, he felt sure, working away to keep the machines going. "I'm sure I can get along," he said, trying his best to keep the reproach out of his voice. He was ashamed at feeling that way, but he did. The bleak fact was that he had felt for a brief moment that dying wouldn't be so hard as long as he could talk to her. Now he didn't know. "Well, hang on then. I can call you twice a day if my figures are right and talk for an hour without draining too much power for what I have to do. Are you sure you'll be all right?" "I'm sure," he lied. And he was right. He wasn't all right. The first 12-hour wait was a mixture of gnawing loneliness and galloping agoraphobia. "About half one and half the other," he commented during one of his lucid moments. They were rare enough, and he didn't begrudge himself the luxury of talking aloud when he was sane enough to understand what he was saying. And then Treemanisha called, and he leaked tears through the entire conversation, but they didn't enter into his voice, and she never suspected. They were happy tears, and they wet the inside of his suit with his boundless love for her. She signed off, and he swung over to hating her, telling the uninterested stars how awful she treated him. how she was the most ungrateful sentient being from here to 70 Ophiuchi. She could spare the power to talk just a few minutes longer, he raged. I'm rotting out here, and she has to go adjust the airflow into her bedroom or sweep up. It's so damn important, all that housekeeping, and she leaves me all alone. Then he kicked himself for even thinking such things about her. Why should she put her life on the line, wasting power she needed to keep breathing just to talk to him? I'm dead already, so she's wasting her time. I'll tell her the next time she calls that she needn't call back. That thought comforted him. It sounded so altruistic, and he was uncomfortably aware that he was liable to be pretty demanding of her. If she did everything he wanted her to, she wouldn't have any time to do anything else. How are you doing, Rock Rogers? Tremonisha! How nice of you to call. I've been thinking of you all day long, just waiting for the phone to ring. Is that sincere, or are you hating me again today? He sobered, realizing that it might be hard for her to tell anymore, what with his manic swings in mood. Sincere. I'll lay it on the line because I can't stand not talking about it anymore. Have you thought of anything I might do to save myself? I've tried to think, but it seems I can't think in a straight line anymore. I get a glimpse of something and it fades away. So I'll ask you. You were always faster than me in seeing a way to do something. What can I do? She was quiet for a long time. Here is what you must do. You must come to terms with your situation and stay alive as long as you can. If you keep panicking like you've been doing, you're going to open your exhaust and spill all your air. Then all bets are off. If you were betting, would you bet that it matters at all how much longer I stay alive? The first rule of survival is never give up. Never. If you do, you'll never take advantage of the quirks of fate that can save you. Do you hear me? Tremonisha, I won't hedge around it any longer. Are you doing something to save me? Have you thought of something? Just what quirks did you have in mind? I have something that might work. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I don't trust you to remain calm about it, and that's all you're getting from me. Haven't you considered that not knowing will upset me more than knowing and worrying about it? Yes, she said evenly, but frankly, I don't want you looking over my shoulder and jostling my elbow while I try to get this together. I'm doing what I can here, and I just told you what you have to do out there. That's all I can do for you, and you won't change it by trying to intimidate me with one of your temper tantrums. Go ahead, sound off all you want, tell me I'm being unfair, that you have a right to know. You're not rational, Jordan, and you are the one who has to get yourself out of that. Are you ready to sign off? I have a lot of work to do. He admitted meekly that he was ready. Her next call was even briefer. He didn't want to remember it, but he had whined at her, and she had snapped at him, then apologized for it, then snapped at him again when he wheedled her for just a teeny tiny hint. Maybe I was wrong not telling you, she admitted, but I know this. If I give in and tell you now, the next phone call will be full of crap from you telling me why my scheme won't work. Buck up, son. Tell yourself a story, recite prime numbers, figure out why entropy runs down. Ask yourself what the humanoid does, but don't do what he does. That isn't your style. I'll see you later. The next 12 hours marked the beginning of rising hope for Jordan, tinged with the first traces of confidence. I think I might be able to hold out, he told the stars. He took a new look at his surroundings. You aren't so far away. he told the cold, impersonal lights. It sounded good, and so he went on with it. Why, how can I feel you're so far away when I can't get any perspective on you? You might as well be specks on my faceplate. You are specks. And they were. With the discovery that he had some control of his environment, he was emboldened to experiment with it. By using his imagination, he could move the stars from his faceplate to the faraway distance, hundreds of meters away. That made the room he was in a respectable size, but not overwhelming. He turned his imagination like a focusing knob, moving the stars and galaxies in and out, varying the size of space as he perceived it. When she called again, he told her with some triumph that he no longer cared about the isolation he was floating in. And it was true. He had moved the stars back to their original positions, light years away, and left them there. It no longer mattered. She congratulated him tiredly. There was strain in her voice. She had been working hard at whatever mysterious labors had kept her from the phone. He no longer believed the story about maintenance occupying all her time. If that was true, when would she find time to work on rescuing him? The logic of that made him feel good all over. He no longer clung to his bit of driftwood as an anchor against the loneliness. Rather, he had come to see it as a home base from which he could wander. He perched on it and looked out at the wide universe. He looked at the tiny, blinding spark that was the sun, and wondered that all the bustling world of people he'd needed so badly for so long could be contained in such a small space. He could put out his thumb and cover all the inner planets, and his palm took in most of the rest. Billions of people down there, packed solid, while he had this great black ocean to wallow around in. Jordan's time was down to 5 hours. He was hungry, and the air in his helmet stank. "The time," Treemonisha stated, "is 14 o'clock, and all is well." Oh, it's you. What is time?" "Oh, brother, you're really getting into it, aren't you? Time is the time for my twice-daily call to see how things are in your neck of space. How are you doing?" "Wonderful. I'm at peace. When the oxygen runs out, I'll at least die a peaceful death, and I have you to thank for it." "I always hoped I'd go kicking and screaming," she said. "And what's this about dying? I told you I had something going." "Thank you, darling, but you don't need to carry on with that anymore. I'm glad you did, because for a time there, if I hadn't thought you were working to save me, I never would have achieved the peace I now have. But I can see now that it was a device to keep me going, to steady me. And it worked, Tree, it worked. Now, before you sign off, would you take a few messages? The first one is to my mother. Dear Mom, hold on there. I refuse to hear anything so terribly personal unless there's a real need for it. Didn't I find a way for you to kill yourself after you had given it up? Don't I always pull more gold out of those transmissions than you do? Haven't you noticed anything? The time lag. Panic was rising again in his voice as he hoarsely whispered, "Where are you?" And instantly, 1,000 kilometers off your starboard forecastle, mate. And closing fast. Look out toward Gemini, and in about 30 seconds, you'll see my exhaust as I try to bring this thing in without killing both of us. This thing, what is it? Spaceship. Hold on. He got himself turned in time to see the burn commence. He knew when it shut off exactly how long the burn had been. He had seen it enough times. It was 3 5/8 seconds, the exact burn time for the first stage of the message rockets he had launched every day for almost a year. "Oh, quite a few G's packed into these things," she said. But how? Hold on a few minutes longer. He did as he was asked. Damn! Well, it can't be helped, but I'm going to go by you at about 50 kilometers per hour and half a kilometer away. You'll have to jump for it, but I can throw you a line. You still have that rocket to push against? Yes, and I have quite a bit of fuel in my backpack. I can get to you. That's pretty good shooting over that distance. Thanks. I didn't have time for anything fancy, but I... Now you hush. I'm going to have to see this to believe it. Don't spoil it for me. And slowly, closing on him at a stately 50 kilometers per, was a thing that she had offhandedly called a spaceship. It was all rough-welded metal and ungainly struts and excess mass, but it flew. The heart of it was a series of racks for holding the message rocket first stages in clusters of 10, but dozens of fourth and fifth stages stuck out at odd angles, all connected by wire to Treemanisha's old familiar lounging chair. All the padding and upholstery had frozen and been carelessly picked off, and in the chair was Treemanisha. Better be ready in about 50 seconds. How did you do it? How long did it take you? I just asked myself, what would Rock Rogers have done? And started whipping this into shape. You don't fool me for an instant. You never cared for rock. What would Mary Jane Peters, super scientist, have done? He could hear the pleased note in her voice, though she tried not to show it. Well, maybe you're right. I worked on it for 3 days, and then I had to go whether it was ready or not, because it was going to take me 2 days to reach you. I worked on it all the way over here, and I expect to nurse it all the way back. But I intend to get back, Jordan, and I'll need all the help I can get from my crew. You'll have it. Get ready. Jump! He jumped, and she threw the line out, and he snagged it, and they slowly spun around each other, and his arms felt like they would be wrenched off, but he held on. She reeled him in, and he climbed into the awkward cage she had constructed. She bustled around, throwing away expended rocket casings, ridding the ship of all excess mass, hooking him into the big oxygen bottle she had fetched. Brace yourself. You're going to have bruises all over your backside when I start up. The acceleration was brutal, especially since he wasn't cushioned for it, but it lasted only 3 5/8 seconds. Well, I've lived through 3 of these big burns now. 1 more to go and we're home free. She busied herself with checking their course, satisfied herself, then sat back in the chair. They sat awkwardly, side by side, for a long 20 seconds. It's funny to be actually sitting here by you, he ventured. I feel the same way. Her voice was subdued, and she found it hard to glance over at him. Hesitantly, her hand reached out and took his. It shocked him to his core, and he almost didn't know what to do, but something took over for him when he finally appreciated, through all the conditioned reflexes, that it was all right. He could touch her. It seemed incredible to him that the spacesuits didn't count for anything. It was enough that they could touch. He convulsively swept her into his arms and crushed her to him. She pounded his back, laughing raggedly. He could barely feel it through the suit, but it was wonderful. It's like making love through an inflated tire, she gasped when she calmed down enough to talk. And we're the only 2 people in the universe who can say that and still say it's great, because before we were making love by postcard. They had another long, hysterical laugh over that. How bad is it at your place? He finally asked. Not bad at all. Everything we need is humming. I can give you a bath. A bath! It sounded like the delights of heaven. I wish you could smell me. No, I'm glad you can't. I wish I could. I'm going to run the tub full of hot water, and then I'm going to undress you and lower you into it, and I'm going to scrub all those things I've been staring at for a year and take my time with it. And then, hey, we don't need stories anymore, do we? Now we can do it. We need them for another 2 days, more than ever now, because I can't reach the place that's begging for attention. But you didn't let me finish. After I get in the tub with you and let you wash me, and before we head hand in hand for my bedroom, I'm going to get Rock Rogers and Mary Jane Peters and the Black Widow and Mark Antony and Jojo and his wild mate and hold their heads under the water until they drown. No, you don't. I claim the right to drown Rock Rogers. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.